Thanks so much to everyone for tuning in. For those of you who haven't had a chance to meet me yet, my name is Amelia Wald. I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Club of New York, and I have the pleasure of representing both the Virginia Club of New York and the UVA Club of Boston tonight. We are very grateful for this partnership with Boston, with the New England area, and with UVA's Office of Engagement to bring you this conversation about food insecurity all across America, with a particular focus on Boston, New York, and Charlottesville, three communities that are close to our heart. A few housekeeping notes for today. You're going to see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen a Q&A box. As questions come to mind, feel free to drop those in the chat at any point during the event. There is going to be a little thumbs up button next to all of the questions that are being submitted. And if you as an audience member see a question that you really like, please go ahead and give that question a like so it can cue to our moderators that the audience is interested in those particular questions. And because we have folks tuning in from all over, we would love if, in addition to including your name, you would also include your class year and the city where you're calling in from. I believe that that's everything for housekeeping tips. Tonight's conversation is being recorded, so if for any reason you do need to step off, we'll go ahead and send out that recording about next week, but we ask for your patience in the meantime. It's my pleasure to introduce Paul Freedman. Paul is an assistant professor of politics at the University of Virginia, and he is additionally a leader in the university's Environmental Thought and Practice program, as well as a leader of food justice and sustainability conversations in Charlottesville. So it's my pleasure to introduce Paul and to have our panelists here with us tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Amelia. It's great to be back at the UVA Club of New York and Boston. I've been to both places to speak with our alums. But I'm particularly happy to be here tonight because I am myself from a mixed marriage. My mother is from the Bronx and grew up just a couple of miles from Yankee Stadium, and my father was from Boston and grew up just about a mile from Fenway Park. So really, my whole life has been leading up to tonight. So I'm really happy to be here to talk about this important question, this important challenge. I'm really pleased to be joined by Drennan of the Greater Boston Food Bank, Joseph Montano of Meatloaf Kitchen in New York City, and Shelby Gibson of the Office of the Dean of Students here at UVA. And we'll be talking about food insecurity. And I wanted to begin just with a note of terminology. When I first started to study food policy and encountered this term food security, I, like many people, assumed that it had to do with the safety of the food supply, perhaps keeping our food safe from bioterrorism. And I pretty quickly came to understand that by food security, we're talking about something that most of us refer to as hunger. Food insecurity refers to the security or stability of a household's access to food. Now, the federal government every year measures food security through an annual survey of households. This is how food security and insecurity get measured at the level of the household. And there are many questions which really boil down to two dimensions. Access to food, whether or not members of the household had enough money to afford food during the previous year, but also anxiety about or uncertainty about access. So whether or not members worried that they would run out of money for food during the year. Now, in fiscal year 2019, the most recent complete data that we have, food insecurity in this country was at a level of 10.5% of US households. 10.5% of US households in 2019 were classified as food insecure. That's about 13 or 14 million households, and that's before the pandemic. What we all know is that the pandemic has made so many problems worse. And indeed, according to a Brookings Institution study, by late October, early November, it wasn't 10.5% of households experiencing food insecurity, it was over 20%. And among US households with children, it was close to 30%. Close to 30% of American households with children experiencing food insecurity. Think about that for a minute. 30%. Now, if we are tempted to imagine that food insecurity is someone else's problem, that it happens somewhere else, Shelby Gibson is here to talk about the very real challenges of food security on college campuses, and not just any college, right here on grounds at the University of Virginia. So we're going to hear about that really close to home. So what I'd like to do is turn things over to our panelists. I've asked each of them to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about who they are, their work, the challenges they face. We'll start with Catherine, then go to Joe and Shelby. Then we'll have some follow-up questions, and then go right to questions from the audience. So, Catherine, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what kinds of challenges you've seen?
Thank you, Paul, and good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here joining you all to share a little bit more about my work at the Greater Boston Food Bank. So I am the Senior Director of Communications and Public Affairs at the Greater Boston Food Bank, and we are the largest hunger relief organization in New England, largest food bank in Massachusetts, and one of the largest in the country, a member of Feeding America, which is national food bank system. There's about 200 food banks in the system. And in Massachusetts, there are actually 3 Feeding America food banks in the state. So we are the largest. We serve probably about 75% of the state, 190 cities and towns in our service area, and nearly 600 distribution programs throughout that region. We work really closely with the other 2 food banks, other Feeding America food banks in Worcester and Western Mass. So kind of collaboratively, we represent the whole state. 1,000 sort of meal pantries, meal sites, mobile markets, distribution centers throughout the state. It is what is called the emergency food bank system. And then, there are a lot of other access points for accessing food, like school meals or after school programs. And we work very collaboratively with those programs as well. So at my job at the Greater Boston Food Bank, I oversee public relations, media, communications, external affairs, and policy. And so I have been extremely busy over the last 11 months or so as food insecurity, hunger has been sort of a front page news story for quite some time because of the unfortunate increase in need. And as a result of that need, lots of policies, lots of new programs, lots of funding, lots of things to navigate over the last several months. As Paul, you mentioned, the insecurity increases skyrocketed in the US, and in Massachusetts is no different. Massachusetts actually saw the highest food security increase compared to any state in the country. And it has to do with a lot with how early we shut down, the high unemployment rates. We had the highest unemployment rate at 17% in June, and we've slowly crept back and gotten better, but back in December, we went back up again, and we are currently still the highest unemployment rate in the country. So that, coupled with, a very vulnerable industry, hospitality, leisure, education, lots of furlough jobs, lots of service industry jobs that are no longer. So we're seeing a lot of people who were unfortunately in a difficult, vulnerable place before the pandemic, even worse off, and a lot of people finding themselves coming to a food pantry or seeking food assistance for the very first time. And that has, you see that reflected in our numbers. So we've seen a 60% increase in distribution since March of food. We've increased our purchasing of food by 130%. We're spending about $2 to $3 million of just private money. That's just private fundraised dollars, doesn't have anything to do with state or federal funding. And our pantries are experiencing about 100% increase in terms of people coming and seeking their services. So just an incredible amount of need, incredible amount of work that we've scaled up with virtually the same exact staff and infrastructure. over the last 11 months. And I'll leave it there. That's my intro so that others can share more with themselves. Oh, Paul, you're on mute.
Yes, I am. Catherine, before we turn things over to Joe, I just, by way of clarification, wanted to ask you to kind of unpack a little bit the difference between the food bank, the Feeding America network, and then the pantries that are affiliated with those banks. So pantries, kitchens, banks, maybe you can just put that into perspective for us.
Yeah. Think of us like your bank, your Bank of America. You've got the umbrella Bank of America, and then you've got all these branches locally in different states, and then the local, ATMs. We are Feeding America, sort of that umbrella of 200 food banks within the system. We are food distribution suppliers, policy, and best practice sort of organizations that support the local independently run pantries, meal program shelters on the ground. So the Greater Boston Food Bank within our service area, as I was saying, we have 190 cities and towns, and then 600 of those partners that we provide food to, technical assistance, expertise, anything that they need. But primarily we're distributing food. If you go into our warehouse, it looks like a Costco.
Great. Catherine, thank you. Joe, over to you. Tell us about Meatloaf Kitchen.
Thank you so much, Professor Freedman. Good evening, everyone. I want to just start out with a heartfelt thanks to the volunteers from the University of Virginia, Virginia Club of New York. They have been just such a great gift to our organization for years and years and years under the leadership of Amelia and with past executive directors. And it's a great feeling to be able to walk into the kitchen as the executive director and to see all these great volunteers from UVA. And so we're grateful for that. University Community Social Services started back in December of 1982. Interestingly enough, it was started by two university professors. They were NYU professors, and they were struck with the plight of the homeless and hungry in Washington Square Park, which kind of forms the center of the urban campus of NYU. And they really moved to do something about it. And so in December 6th of 1982, it was a Monday, they went to a nearby kitchen that was made available to them. It wasn't part of the university per se, but it was used by one of the clubs of the university. And there they served chili. And somehow we got from chili to meatloaf over the years, but that was our first soup kitchen. And we stayed in that site for about 6 months. And by the spring, we were told that we didn't have that space for the summer. So our co-founders, undaunted, began a search in the neighborhood to find another space. And they did find the basement and social hall of a nearby church. And so they set up shop there, and they stayed there for 24 years. And then in 2008, that building was being decommissioned. And so we moved to our present location. So here we are, on the threshold of our 38th year. And we're really experiencing several issues in regard to food insecurity. Due to the pandemic, we've seen numbers increase dramatically. We're not serving on Monday anymore, we're serving every Saturday. We've, over the years, transitioned to Meatloaf. We've become known on the street as the Meatloaf Kitchen, although we do serve breakfast, so we could easily be hard-boiled egg kitchen as well. But the numbers went from like 90 and 100 folks showing up for breakfast to a staggering 350 people. And I'm not very good at math, but I think that's a triple digit increase percentage-wise. And then for lunch, we saw another great increase, and lunch virtually doubled. So we have now folks that are coming to us, not only who are street homeless, but families who are struggling. And we're also seeing individuals who are coming to us because they've lost their jobs. They're on the verge of losing their apartment. And whatever meals that they can get, and they don't have to go to a supermarket and purchase food to prepare those meals, is really a boon to them. We've always had, I guess, 4 major principles. We serve a wholesome meal, one that we would eat ourselves. We serve with dignity and respect in the manner that we would like to be served. And prior to the pandemic, we served in a restaurant style atmosphere without a cashier. And all of that with no questions asked, as all are welcome. Those principles that we've had really have not changed, except for the restaurant. Now we do grab and go on the street. We also try to continue our social services, which were incorporated into the work that we were doing all these years, but we do it in a different way. To promote social distancing and to keep the line moving and to keep everybody safe and sound, we're basically including info cards and flyers in their meal bag so that we're able to disseminate information. And then from there, they can, individuals can seek out further information from the information that we provide. And I think, though, what really is, I guess, the most heartwarming and wrenching at the same time is that just to be there and to see the folks and to give them a wave or to, you know, sort of give them a little bit of a shout out behind your mask, just to let them know that we're still there for them, no matter what happens. And it was really part of our co-founders' mission to continue this work. And really, they always called it service. They didn't really call it work. And to continue during the pandemic to continue to serve. We really didn't have to retool so much because even in the days we were serving restaurant style, we did have a few days each year where the social hall wasn't available to us. So we had this contingency plan back in the 80s and 90s and the aughts, and that was to serve sandwiches. So we just very quickly last year, through a series of board meetings, our little working board of 8 people, we simply said, well, we're going to go to Sandwich Day, but we're going to have it every Saturday as Sandwich Day until the pandemic's over. So while COVID numbers have increased and been a challenge to us, and food insecurity is certainly there, we really have prepared over the years for the rainy day, and this is the rainy day. So we're trying our best to continue our work, our service to our guests, and we really have been seeing so many people every Saturday just thanking us profusely for being there. They really thought that we would have closed last March. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. What an amazing story of an organization that has had to be flexible and nimble and innovative over the course of 38 years. Shelby, let's hear about the situation here at the University of Virginia.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to Ben for inviting me to this event, and for the other folks who have kind of done all the organizational work behind this. I appreciate being invited to this. So my name is Shelby Gibson. I'm the case manager in the Office of the Dean of Students. And I have the luxury of having a job that people will never understand what I do just based off of saying what my title is, which is fine. So I'm happy to unpack that a little bit. As case manager, I serve as a generalist in the Office of the Dean of Students. That means that my work focuses on supporting students who are experiencing anything that makes it difficult to be healthy and successful at the university. As you can imagine, that's an extremely broad area and has continued to broaden as we are in the midst of a global pandemic. But in addition to my role as a generalist, I lead the university's Food Insecurity Resource Group, a project that was given to me when one of my colleagues went on paternity leave, and then I never gave it back. FIRG is a group of professionals, staff, and students who work in a variety of capacities to address food insecurity for UVA students. Our focus is to create equitable, efficient, and effective systems that serve students who struggle at an economically stratified university like UVA to bring their full self to the classroom because of disruptions to their basic needs. So that's a lot of higher ed jargon to essentially say, we work to make sure that every student at UVA has enough to eat and that they can obtain enough to eat in a way that they see as socially acceptable and that's easy, and they don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops to do it. I also have the extreme privilege of working closely with the student leaders who run the UVA Community Food Pantry. And I support their work through advocacy to senior administration and fundraising. And I'm happy to talk more about that. But now I'll talk just a little bit about what FIRG is, the Food Insecurity Resource Group, and kind of what we do, because it, again, higher ed, we love acronyms, we love kind of broad terminology. So I love specifics. And so I'm happy to kind of talk about what we do more specifically. So our projects include a couple different things. The first one that I'll talk briefly about is the Satellite Food Pantry Network. So I mentioned the UVA Community Food Pantry. That's a student-led initiative. The food pantry is currently located in Newcomb Hall, which some of you may be familiar with. But those of you that aren't, that's essentially our student union, where a lot of the kind of cafeteria food services are housed for the university. And so the food pantry moved in there at the beginning of last year, great timing, January 2020, the food pantry opened in their permanent space for the first time. But the Satellite Food Pantry Network consists of a number of smaller food pantries on grounds. And the goal of that is to meet students where they are. UVA students, and it may be like this for other college students as well, tend not to venture out of their little area of where classes are held normally when classes are held in person, or where their study spots are. And so we really try to create this network of smaller pantries so that students don't have a barrier to access. Say if they're a nurse and they never come from McLeod Hall, which is one side of grounds geographically, if they can't make it all the way over to Newcomb, we really just want to meet them where they are. So those are all run and supported by the programs that house them. And then I financially support them and kind of give logistical support as needed. Another project of ours is expanding access to fresh produce through all of our food pantries. So we work specifically with two groups, the Morven Kitchen Garden, which is a part of the UVA Foundation, and Greens to Grounds, which is a nonprofit run by students, of course, because UVA. So we work with them, both of them, to get fresh produce distributed to our food pantry partners. I was actually in a meeting today talking about seasonal produce. If you had told me when I was in grad school for student affairs, I'd be talking a lot about seasonal produce, probably would have laughed. But now as I tell my GA every day is a case study in higher ed. So it's always exciting. Another one of my favorite projects that we do with FIRG is Who's Giving. We have a Thanksgiving meal every year for students who don't necessarily have to be food insecure, but for folks who are on grounds or campus. For the non-UVA affiliated folks, we like our special words at UVA. But the folks who stay at school over Thanksgiving break, they can stay and they can eat with us. Sponsored by Dining at UVA, which is one of my favorite partners. They pay for everything in kind, and I just get to show up and scoop mashed potatoes, which is fabulous. We're also really working on a SNAP awareness kind of outreach campaign. When I say outreach campaign, I mean, I tell students that they're eligible for SNAP. We're trying to expand that right now because students are eligible for SNAP if they have a federal work-study position and work at least 20 hours. That kind of gets them over the hump. I know some of my other folks on this panel may be able to speak to SNAP a little bit more in a nuanced way than I can, but I know that that eligibility has opened up in the last year with some of the COVID provisions that have come down from the federal government. So we're trying to get students connected to that because that's a great option for students. One of my other kind of personal projects right now is establishing an endowment for the food pantry. So my goal is to create sustainable structures at UVA so we can shift the work around things like food insecurity from a charitable response to a systemic response. So what we want is to build systems in place for students to always have support at UVA. So if they're considering UVA on their list of schools, they can look and see that this is something that we prioritize. So if they come from a household that's dependent on SNAP, they know that their story is part of the UVA story as well. So that's another sort of pet project of mine that has kind of gotten off the ground in the last couple of weeks. And then the last one, which kind of answers preemptively some questions that folks may have, our biggest project is data collection. So how many students are experiencing this on grounds? The biggest question I get when I talk about my work is this something that UVA students experience? And I'm sure I see Paul nodding his head. I know he works in this space a lot. So we talk about this all the time. Yes is the answer. So we have a lot of data that shows a lot of kind of smaller data samples right now from representative samples that shows that between 12 and 14% of a representative sample of our undergraduate students experience persistent severe food insecurity. And about 24 to 30% of our students experience what's termed low food security. So this is more kind of, stretching your budget to make it work for an extra 4 or 5 days. This is cutting meals or making decisions that you think will kind of not signal to people that you're struggling to have enough to eat. So between 24 and 30% of our students experience this. It also includes folks who worry about getting enough to eat. Which with college mental health being such a challenge, such a significant thing that we want to make sure that we're addressing, students worrying about this is a huge problem. And based on our data sets right now, the most recent data, that we received last year showed that food insecurity is most prevalent among our third year, so our juniors, and our LGBTQ plus students on grounds. And I could kind of sit here and think on all of the higher ed professional reasons why I think that is, but it's prevalent among our students. This may sound Pollyannish, but I've always held to the belief that if one student at UVA doesn't have enough to eat, that it's a problem. And so we keep seeing these statistical demonstrations over and over again that this is a significant issue. We have a larger data set that's hoping to result here in the next couple months that we ran last year. We're anticipating a significant uptick based on COVID. I know that our food pantry went from spending about $500 a week on groceries to close to $1,000 just to keep the pantry stocked. And so that's kind of our current budget. We're working on a couple different things, the possibility of getting the pantry classified as a 501c3, partnering with our local food bank, like Catherine was talking about, to be a partner in that way so we can buy food at cost. The other thing that we're concerned about is we currently don't have great data on graduate students. So folks who may be more likely to have other life circumstances that they're juggling, dependents, that kind of thing. So that is my kind of spiel about what this looks like on grounds or on campus at UVA. My graduate student has gotten really fluent in interpreting me giving information to them like a fire hose. So I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions or speak more to concerns that folks have.
Yeah.
Thanks again for having me.
Shelby, thank you so much. And let me start with a few follow-up questions. First, as you know, this is almost surely a more serious problem among our graduate students. But just to go back to the preliminary data, that you shared. I mean, if we're really talking about 10 to 14% of University of Virginia undergraduates experiencing food insecurity, both in terms of not having access to food, and you made the really important point, alluding to my observation earlier, that part of this is the anxiety, the uncertainty. 10 to 14%, I suspect that there are people here joining us in the audience who either don't believe that or think it is outrageous and unacceptable, to which I would say, yeah, it's unacceptable, right? And let's think about what that means and what it would mean for us not to accept it, okay? But in terms of being surprised at these numbers, Shelby, we have a really super question from my old friend, Jeff Galati, who himself is a professor at a Massachusetts institution. And Jeff asks, as a professor, how might we recognize if a student is experiencing food insecurity? And this is such a good question because one of the reasons it's so surprising is that it's so hidden. We can't see this among our students. And I wonder if you can speak to that. The last thing I'll say, Shelby, is that we've been talking about undergraduates and graduate students, but as we at UVA have been talking about the challenges of food insecurity, we've also recognized that it is a problem confronting our colleagues who are staff members at the university, particularly contract staff members living here in Charlottesville, but working at the university. And so this really is something in our community that, that we don't appreciate on a daily basis, even if it's with us on a daily basis. So what can you say to Jeff about what faculty and others at the university can do by way of recognizing this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much, Jeff. These are the kind of questions that I get excited about. And I'm like, yes, this is what my job is for. I'm here to support excellent faculty like Jeff who want to reach out to our students. What I tell faculty all the time is that you all are going to spend way more time with our students than I am. And so if I can equip you all with the tools to be kind of our eyes and ears, for lack of a better term, and by ours, I mean the folks who are on campus or on grounds as helping professionals, that just makes the students' life easier by knowing that they have such a broad umbrella of support. So the things, there are really kind of two things here, right? Like there are very practical steps that faculty can take. The Hope Lab, which is a big research firm that put out one of the largest food insecurity studies on college students. If you like to read research studies for fun, like I do, you can Google Hope Lab study. There's lots of good information in that about food insecurity among college students. But Hope Lab also has very practical things for faculty, like syllabi statements. So you can include a statement on your syllabus to say, if you're experiencing this type of basic needs insecurity, I'm a safe person to talk to about this. I'm knowledgeable. I'm happy to connect you with resources. So there are very practical steps like that. Somewhere in the middle is just knowing about resources on your campus or on grounds is a huge step. And I know faculty, especially these days, right? Your to-do list is not short. But if you can take a couple minutes just to look around online and see what the resources are at your campus, that's hugely helpful just to know. So if you know, by chance a student comes forward and says that, or if they mention it in an email, you know, if you feel comfortable sharing those resources directly, that's always great. I always tell faculty, you know, I'm happy to be BCC'd on something and just to be there if the student does decide to reach out, or just to put the student on my radar in case they come up in a different way. But the other part of that is a little bit, you know, more challenging, right? Because it's the interpersonal piece, it's the qualitative, it's the relationship building. We're very fortunate at UVA that we have excellent professors who really care about our students. And so they're very engaged with what the students are doing, how they're doing in class. If a student doesn't show up or show up on Zoom, for example, nowadays, they're quick to reach out to the Dean of Students office and say, hi, I'm worried about this student. But, you know, those types of conversations are more difficult to have, and I would imagine even more difficult on Zoom than just how are you doing? So the things that I always tell folks to look out for with students is, you know, anything that would just be a change in their normal behavior. So if the student is normally very, very upbeat, energetic, engaging in class a lot. And they pretty rapidly stopped doing that, doing just kind of a general check-in. This isn't always something that displays food insecurity, right? It could just display that they're having a hard time. But I think using those practical steps, like signaling that you're a safe person on your syllabi with that syllabi statement, and then following it up with your behavior in the classroom, talking about, hey, this is an issue, or even addressing at the beginning of a class at the beginning of the semester. If you're having a hard time with something, I'm here as a resource to you as your professor. I think those things are hugely valuable. And Paul, you may also be able to speak to that, because I know you kind of do this day to day with students in this capacity, but those are the things that just come to mind for me. But thank you for that question. I love that question.
Yeah, great. And Shelby, the work that you're doing is so important. As you've noted, particularly during COVID, so many of the stresses that our students ordinarily are experience have just been obviously exacerbated. Catherine, I want to turn back to you, and I want to talk a little bit about the nature of food insecurity as a problem of poverty. And I think it's worth pointing out, we live in a land of abundance, right? This is we live in a nation in which there is a tremendous amount of food. It's everywhere. And we like to claim credit for feeding the world and exporting our food, our grain, all over the world. To what extent, Catherine, is food insecurity a problem of food versus a problem of money, of income, of poverty? And to the extent that it is a problem of poverty, could you tell, which obviously it is, can you tell us a little bit about, Shelby mentioned SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, one of the largest programs, federal programs in existence. Tell us a little bit about how SNAP works, but importantly, why SNAP isn't enough. Why do you and Joe do the work that you do, even in the face of spending tens of billions of dollars a year on supplemental nutrition assistance, or what used to be called food stamps?
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack, but yes, absolutely. Food insecurity is a symptom of poverty. It is, I think, there was a question in the chat that asked about, can we just raise minimum wage and solve this issue through work, employment and training? And yes, I guess that is the root cause. And I think we would love to see that. People who come and seek food from the Greater Boston Food Bank, there's a lot of different reasons, not just the food bank, but pantries. There's a lot different reasons. There's, potentially they're unemployed because of a sickness or a disability or mental illness or a million different things. But oftentimes it's that they're, not earning enough to make ends meet. That's essentially what's happening. And so people are looking to supplement their budgets. Typically, food, it tends to be the last thing. You need to pay your rent, you need to pay your gas, put gas in your car to go to work, you need to pay your childcare to make sure your kids are taken care of while you're trying to get to work. And potentially you're going to work and making less than minimum wage, and you have really no chance to kind of get ahead. And so that's why, programs like pantries are here. I would like to definitely put an emphasis on SNAP. SNAP is our #1 defense against hunger in this nation. For perspective, in terms of scale, for every one meal the emergency food provider, a pantry, meal program, shelter, the food banks are providing, SNAP provides 9 in the US. And so it's just a much larger program, and especially as we can see in crisis, it's able to scale up. And it's also, an economic stimulus program. For every $1 that's put into the program, you're putting about $1.70 back into the local economy. So, and just throw another stat out there for Massachusetts since March, because there has been some boost to SNAP, there's been $110 million each month putting into SNAP. That's a lot of money. Why not just raise minimum wage? I think that's, I don't want to get into, the true politics of everything, but what is exciting about this new administration is how they're looking at this issue as an economic issue. It's not hunger, nutrition over here on an island. It's talking about why, you know, people are finding themselves in an insecure, economically insecure moment in their lives in the first place. I think one more thing around SNAP, you know, right now or historically, the program, while, you know, huge in scale, the actual benefit that people are receiving has not traditionally been enough. So there's a lot of people on SNAP who are coming to the pantry at the end of the month when their benefit runs out. There are a lot of people who, because of the eligibility guidelines, don't qualify for SNAP. They actually earn too much to qualify for SNAP, but too little to make ends meet. So they're coming to seek food assistance. I think some of the provisions that have come out of recent COVID packages, by increasing SNAP by 15%, extending waivers, kind of taking away those barriers, are the things that are going to help sort of in the near term. But I think long term, how to solve this problem, you have to, you know, allow people to be able to make you know, ends meet and make a living wage that is going to support themselves and their families.
Great, Catherine. Let's turn things over to Joe. If you want to speak either to what you see as how SNAP works or anything else about these sorts of challenges.
Yes, well, you know, for many of our guests, the real challenge is, you know, living in our city, New York City, is just so expensive. And we are in a portion of the city where there was the beginnings of gentrification, and many of the families were living in you know, subsidized housing or assisted living arrangements. And so the toll on the elderly, the toll on the families in our neighborhood, they were kind of, you know, sort of holding their own before the pandemic. And then once the pandemic hit, it tipped the scales. So prior to the pandemic, most of our guests were either street homeless or guests who were living in shelters or in halfway houses, or they were in rehab programs. And now we're seeing families. We're seeing men and women who have lost their jobs because of the pandemic. We've seen people who just can't afford the prices in the supermarkets because they're on fixed or limited incomes. So whatever can be done by any of the governments, whether it's the municipal, local government, or the state government, or the federal government, to really shore up the working individual, really is going to be helpful in lessening that aspect of food insecurity. I think it'll be there for a very, very long time. I think we've only begun to, you know, start to address it and be conscious of what needs to be done in order to sort of rework this mechanism that has created it, so to speak. And so if we can intervene at this point in many ways in terms of policy change and even just in terms of the food banks and the pantries and the kitchens doing their part to shore things up while we come to real long-term solutions, I think that's going to be the way to go. We need to be in an emergency mode for the pandemic. We need to be in an emergency mode for food insecurity.
Thank you, Joe. I'm really struck by your description of your work and Catherine's work as you know, that you're not solving these problems, you're responding to these problems, and so the solutions are going to have to come from somewhere else. And so let's let's turn to that now. And Catherine, why don't I ask you, what needs to happen? And more specifically, and this is a question that many of our panelists have been, attendees have been asking in one form or another, what can we do to help? If we agree with Freedman that this is unacceptable, how do we not accept it? What should we do on the individual level, and what should we be doing at the collective level in terms of our own work, but also what do we need to see in policy?
Yeah, I think I saw a comment in the chat that, this problem just seems so big and it's so hard. It seems like a drop in the bucket. And there are things that you can do. I think one thing is, voting and electing people into office that are going to make long-term root cause sustainable and systemic solutions. I will say, some of the things that are coming that have come out of COVID, in some ways, you've kind of shined a bright light on this problem that has always existed, and some of the policies that have come out of COVID relief packages are things that we'd like to keep and keep to stay forever. Things like universal school meals, making sure that kids are fed, and you remove the stigma, remove the shame, make sure every student is getting a meal when they come to a classroom and they're all, equally ready to learn. That's one thing. There are things like SNAP, making sure that the investments are being made there so that people that are on the program aren't having to go to multiple different programs to sort of piecemeal what their food budget looks like. So making sure that it's an adequate level. I know one thing that the USDA has been charged with is taking a look at the calculation and how that benefit is even put together, and that has not been looked at since the 70s. This is a very antiquated program, and the way it's calculated based on very old metrics, does not take into consideration around geographic differences in cost of prices around food. So some of those types of things that are really sort of evaluating these programs and making sure that they're actually working. So that's like a big thing. And then I think, the minimum wage piece, making sure that there are workforce development programs, I think addressing different populations. There are seniors that are, on fixed incomes, and, are there areas that we can, things that we can fix there? Are there things that we can do around veterans? Are there things that we can do around college students, targeting different populations that are particularly vulnerable? I think we'll get into, I'd love to hear what other people have to say about how, any one person can help, but I think getting involved, engaged, and, advocating for these policies is one way. And of course, open up your checkbook and also, roll up your sleeves and volunteer. I think those are two big ways that you can help.
Great, and actually, let's give Joe a chance to answer those same questions, and maybe Joe, you can talk a bit more about rolling up our sleeves and what individuals can do. Great question from Mark, who asks about whether we can say something about how feeding someone offers dignity and can provide a chance to face other challenges in their lives. And I don't know, it sounds like, Joe, that may be something that you've observed in your own work. So what can be?
Yes. Thank you, Professor Freedman, and thank you, Mark, for your question. One of the real parts of our mission at University Community Social Services, aka the Meatloaf Kitchen, is that we are there to really encourage our guests to, we're giving them not a handout, but we're giving them a hand up. We're not handing them a fish, we're teaching them how to fish. So we want to encourage our guests to do as much as they can for themselves. However, over the last 11 months, the pandemic has been such a pressing issue that it really has really affected our guests in a very profound way, in that they really are somewhat immobilized by the immensity of this issue. Coupled with that, you have food prices going up at the supermarkets. You have scarcity of food available because some of the food pantries and the kitchens actually have closed. So everything's become exacerbated. And I think that, promoting their dignity, promoting their respect is so important. And I really want to just mention that we have been so fortunate to have many, many volunteers respond, both by, as Catherine said, rolling up their sleeves or writing in their checkbook. It's been amazing over the last several months how many people have responded to want to come out and really assist our guests and help them during really an unprecedented time. And however they choose to do it, that's fine with us. If they can support us in terms of having the means to give us funds so that we can make purchases of food and have readily available food for our guests each and every Saturday and not worry about our supply, that's fantastic. If they come down and they roll up their sleeves and they begin to prepare a salad or mix meatloaf for us, that's fantastic. I think, again, it's that sense of response from our volunteers that really then our guests perceive that they feel that they are being treated with real respect and dignity. They say, look, here are these volunteers coming out at a time where it's risky, and they're coming out for me so that I can get a meal. And they're so grateful. And I think that really ties together the aspect of, how volunteers can help, how we can really demonstrate to our guests a sense of dignity and respect, and yet be there in a very, very profound way for our guests and lift them and help them through this unprecedented time.
Excellent, Joe. Thank you so much. Shelby, you want to talk a little bit about how people can help, what the priorities are, and how people can get involved?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So I kind of alluded to it already, but we are working and in the process of establishing an endowment specifically for the student-led food pantry. That endowment would be housed under Student Affairs, which is the division that my office sits under. I will plug, because I saw someone asking in the Q&A, if you want more information about how to give directly to the endowment, please reach out to me. You can just email me. It's my first and last name at virginiaspelledout.edu. I would be happy to connect you with one of our gift officers. I talked to them before this and they said, great, please send folks our way. Also, if you would like to donate directly to the food pantry, you can do that as well. Pantry@uva.org is their website. There's a tab there that has a direct link to give financially. It also has information if you're in the Charlottesville area and would like to give food resources. We also receive those. It has their contact information, and their drives coordinator can be connected to you. This is something that I would love to get on the budget at the university for us to permanently support. But with COVID and all of the other kind of financial demands of the university, that's just not where we are right now. And so this type of endowment allows us to establish this work long-term without kind of the fluctuations of state appropriations and all the different things that influence the university's budget year over year. we recognize this is a significant problem for our students, and it seems, to Paul's point, borderline offensive that this is something at a school where 75% of our students pay for their full tuition out of pocket. There are students who can't afford to have enough to eat, but it's true. And so, it seems oversimplified, but as much as you can share money right now, we're really in a resource building and a resource developing phase with this project. This is going to continue to be an issue after we stop talking about it. And, after folks are kind of interested in it. It's been an issue before. I worked in the Dean of Students office and took up this work. So as much as we can kind of financially bolster what we're doing, that's really the priority. And then post-COVID, you can volunteer and come to Who's Giving and do all of those things. But for now, it's really just money. That's our huge ask.
Terrific. And Catherine, let me follow up with the same question. And I'm thinking about here in Charlottesville, and I know really all over the country, we regularly have these food drives and can drives, and people are asked to donate canned food. And I'm always wondering, is that better than writing a check? Is it better than volunteering time? Is it all fungible? Is it all the same? Or should I just write a letter to my member of Congress to try to fix this at a higher level?
Yeah, I don't ever want to deny anyone who wants to help in any way they can. I will say that writing a check is definitely will go a lot further on our end. We have a purchasing power at the food bank and relationships with food industry where we can buy product in bulk and get it at a wholesale cost. And we're distributing, pallets and pallets of large, truckloads of food. I think if you are going to donate anything, potentially reach out to your local pantry. And if there's a product that they are really in need of, potentially that's something you could help with. I think that goes a lot further than emptying your own pantry and giving it away. But yes, I would love to just emphasize, right to your member of Congress. I think there was a question in the chat about who's really focused on these issues. Massachusetts Congressman Jim McGovern is the nationwide leader on these issues. Because he's the leader and he's in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts tends to be a very progressive state, this delegation is very supportive of these issues. If you're hailing from another state somewhere else in the nation, reach out to your hometown legislator or representative in Congress and ask them to prioritize these issues.
Yeah. Wonderful, Catherine. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of our panelists, Shelby, Joe, Catherine. This has been really wonderful. I'm going to turn things back over to Amelia, but let me note that Ashley Gresh has been putting many of the links to the things that people have been talking about into the chat. So you should be able to see some of them and follow up with some of the things we've been talking about tonight. So thank you all. And Amelia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Paul, and all of our wonderful panelists for this conversation. I know I am very appreciative of ending on this action note, of this call to action about, fighting against those feelings of helplessness that I think a lot of us feel when we wonder, how can we help others in our communities? So to that end, after this panel is over, you'll be getting an email from me with a lot of the resources that Ashley's been putting in the chat and that Shelby and Joe and Catherine have been talking about. So I want to thank all of you so much for joining us tonight, for continuing to fight for this issue and to advocate for those in our country and around our world who are struggling with food insecurity and with hunger, and offering them the dignity and the respect that we hope they all feel in their hearts. So have a wonderful evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.